Hello, everybody, and welcome into a new edition of the Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass. I'm Evan Lazar, joined as always by Alex Barth, and I wish we could break into today's show with some awesome news about a bunch of Patriots signings or a big splash free agent addition, but we are still sitting here on Thursday, just after 5 o'clock on the 17th, the second official day of the league year, Alex, waiting for any sort of roster lock, a player that we can get excited about. I tried to pull up some Montgomery tape. It really didn't jazz me up all that much, and we'll get to him in a second here. But I think the biggest thing that's on everybody's mind right now is what the heck is going on with this team? Why such the major reluctance to spend any sort of significant cash on anybody in free agency so far? And I think the biggest question that I have is not necessarily why. Why are the Patriots not spending? I think the biggest thing that I am concerned about is now that Tom Brady is no longer here, can they use this model and this approach to be a Super Bowl contender? Because this isn't that far astray from what they've done in the past. Yes, they've had some of their big splash signings like Stephon Gilmore, or I don't want to mention or bring up bad things, but Adalius Thomas comes to mind, Rodney Harrison, the beginning part of the dynasty.
You thought of Adalius Thomas before you thought of Rodney Harrison?
No, just going in order. But I think the biggest thing is this now still a winnable formula without Tom Brady? There's still some good players out there that the Patriots could go and get. There's some guys that have been released recently, Fletcher Cox, Lyle Collins, Logan Ryan, even Trey Flowers. But are those the types of players, and are those the types of moves that are ultimately going to get this team closer to a Super Bowl? Because right now it feels like we are much further away from where they were before free agency started, and they don't seem at all interested in spending money and investing into this roster right now to make a real splash.
Yeah, first off, you're not wearing green on St. Patrick's Day, so you suck.
Nice.
Second of all, I think this year does feel different. I think, and look, they've taken a backseat during free agency before, right? Nobody's going to deny that. Last year was ultimately the anomaly, but how many times did we get to Thursday of free agency week, right? And they hadn't signed a roster lock. For what it is, I think the Montgomery signing is a good signing, right?
Yeah.
$4 million for a guy who's going to give you depth all over the field. That's great. That's an excellent signing. When that's the signing, it's a little more concerning, right? How many times have we gotten a Thursday and they haven't signed a guy who's a roster lock? And it's not just that. It's they're moving backwards, right? It's you trade away Shaq Mason, which they didn't need to do. That's the big one for me. If you just get rid of the Shaq Mason trade, all right, they lost J.C. Jackson, spending on the fringes. This is what they do. This is right. It's the Shaq Mason trade for me that feels so out of context. That's the one that I can't get over. That's the one that worries me. Besides that, yeah, it's pretty typical. They're a little slower than usual, but it does feel like at this point, and I've said this all week, and I'll say it again, this is a long, long process. We are 4 days into a 3-month process. But to this point, it does feel like they've moved backwards, not forwards.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern that I have I agree with you 100% with the Shaq Mason trade, is that this isn't just about top of the market guys like Allen Robinson, right? I reported just a few minutes ago that the Patriots had some legitimate interest in Allen Robinson, but as soon as they heard the money, they bowed out. Then others have reported that Brennan Scarlett was a target for the Patriots from the Dolphins. He ends up going back to Miami on a 1-year deal for low money because the Patriots were the other team involved but didn't want to pay him more than the Dolphins were offering him. Ted Karras, one of their own, right? He gets more money from Cincinnati. They won't match it. They were never at all involved in J.C. Jackson, really. They never really made a concerted effort or a legitimate offer that J.C. was actually going to take that could to bring him back here. So this is top of the market guys like JC and Allen Robinson that they're lowballing or not interested in because at their price point. It's mid-tier guys. They were interested in Jakeem Grant. They pivoted to Ty Montgomery because he's the cheaper option. Even guys like Brennan Scarlett, who I think we're going to find out here, got $6 million to go back to the Miami Dolphins. The Patriots, too expensive for us, right? So everybody right now at every tier for New England is too expensive. And I personally don't think that fans should take that. Like, I'm not saying that we have to freak out and scream and yell and panic 2 days into free agency. But the fact that this team that Forbes just valuated at $5 billion is trying to use money as an excuse for why they are not making their roster better is a shame. It's a shame. I shouldn't even say a shame. It's a sham, right? Because that's truly not what's happening here. The Patriots have the ability, they have the flexibility to move cap around and to make it happen if they want to make it happen when it comes to signing guys. They don't want to make it happen. They don't want to pay the money. And to me, that is more of a disservice to the fan base than anything else that they could possibly do, because that means that they are not investing into the product on the field. Sure, you can go ahead and rebuild your lighthouse, right? And you can put your new stadium, half a stadium up there, Robert Kraft, but you're not actually going to go out and make the money, put money on the field and the on-field product. That to me is a complete disservice to the fans.
Again, there's a long way to go. I don't entirely. They can be flexible. So this to me is why it's different. They're generally flexible with the cap when they need to be, right? They may not go ahead and open up $60 million to sign the top receiver and top pass rusher on the market, but they generally do have some level of flexibility. I don't think they've exercised one of those opportunities this year out, like in terms of player retention, right? They traded Shaq Mason. That was their move to free up cap. They haven't done it in terms of restructures. There's guys, forget even restructuring where you're still paying the same amount of money. You're just paying more of it up front. A guy like Jake Bailey, right? It makes sense to extend Jake Bailey, work on a new deal. There is a football reason for that. And he's still on the, although he might get cut, I don't know, but he's still on the 1-year deal.
Yeah. So my theories here, and I wrote about this morning on CLNSmedia.com. My theories about it. Why are they being so frugal with their money this offseason? I think the obvious thing is to point to last offseason and say they spent their cash then, right? They were number one in the league in real cash spending in 2021. That was their big payday. They don't want to do it again. But I think when you dig deeper into this, what really it presents to me is something that Robert Kraft said to us in the media last year after the free agent spending spree. And that was two things. One, it was the most money he had ever shelled out in an offseason, just in terms of pure capital in his 27 years as the owner. The second thing that he said was that they used to laugh at teams that used to go out and spend like crazy in the offseason and quote unquote win the offseason. The Patriots used to at people like that, right? That built their teams like that. We're going to do it with value and we're going to do it the smart way. And maybe they'll end up being right. Maybe their patience will end up paying off and they'll end up getting some of these players at good value. And maybe they'll end up signing some of these guys that are, in terms of, releases and things like that, that aren't factors in the comp pick formula. I think that those things could possibly happen, right? And maybe we'll all look like dummies for freaking out in the first week of free agency come September when they have a good roster. But again, I come back to what I said at the beginning. Can they win at a competitive championship level, building the roster with value signings and buy low candidates and bargain buys in the offseason and not going out and no one's asking them to spend $200 million guaranteed again, right? It's not, no one's expecting them to go out there and go absolutely nuts like they did last offseason. But can we get one player that moves the needle? Can we get one player that makes this team significantly better? Because they were nowhere near good enough last year as it was. They were a blowout in Buffalo in the wild card round and see you later. So not only have they gotten worse by the guys that they have lost, but they weren't even close to good enough last year. So I come back to, again, can they win like this? Can they win being this value-based model team that doesn't want to compromise the future cap years. And I think a lot of people look around the league and they say, well, how are the Rams doing it? How are the Saints doing it? How are all the Bucks and the Bills doing it? The Bucks and the Bills and the Saints and the Rams, they all borrow money from the future, right? They look at their future cap. They use void years. They use salary conversions. They do all these types of things. And everybody says, oh, the bill will come due eventually. Meanwhile, in New Orleans, has the bill really came due? They're $30 million under the cap, right? So when does the bill come due? I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me when the police or the IRS show up at New Orleans at the Superdome and say, if you don't pay your wages now, then you're out of the league, right? I don't think that's coming anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, just to backtrack, organization, this doesn't feel like a value-based offseason. It feels like just cutting costs. As I said this yesterday, I spent all of last year pounding the table for that 4-year rebuild, right? And I said, hey, look, if they don't, when they had the 1 seed, we were all talking about, hey, if they don't end up winning the division, that's fine because they got a window, right? Because they got time, because they're going to build on this, and this is the foundation, and they're going to build on top of this. They've instead just chipped away at the foundation. This isn't, it's not about value-based to me. This just isn't how you operate when you have a rookie quarterback who's a starting caliber player. This just isn't how this is done. You figure out a way to keep J.C. Jackson. You certainly don't trade off a starting caliber guard for cap reasons. Those are moves teams make when they're getting ready to hit that reset button. And they're like the Browns are going to be that team next year. You watch, because apparently Baker Mayfield wants out, right? We're seeing teams like the Texans do this, move on from guys for salary cap reasons because they just want to clear the books, clean slate. You're going to start the whole thing over, right? That's what it feels like the Patriots are lining up for. This is what they did in 2020. Outside of tagging Joe Thuney, I still don't entirely get why they did that. But, they traded Duron. There's no need for them to trade Duron Harmon, but they moved on from Duron Harmon for picks. They let a bunch of guys just walk, and because they knew, and I think we all knew deep down, as much as we wanted them to keep winning post Brady, I think they knew that they just kind of needed a reset year, and that's what it was.
Right.
You don't take a reset year the year after taking a quarterback 15th overall. That's just
and
not...
year after winning 10 games and moving your whole operation forward. Right.
Exactly. It's not, if they had taken, to go back to a draft argument we had a ton last year, if they had taken Kellen Mond or Davis Mills in the 3rd round, and those guys flopped and they won 7 games, then this offseason makes a ton of sense. All right, you got to reset it again. Right. Like you said, they won 10 games. They were right there for the division. You shouldn't be, you should be building on that foundation, not resetting the foundation.
Yeah. I think that's the most frustrating thing, is that this should be, they don't need to be uncharacteristically aggressive like they were last offseason.
Right.
But they should still be
targeted moves. Targeted moves was supposed to be the phrase this offseason.
Right. They should still have the pedal to the metal, right? They should still be aggressive and still trying to add to this roster. And I'm sorry, like, if they go out there and they go into that pool of recent released veterans and they start kind of signing Logan Ryans and Trey Flowers of the world and stuff like that, I don't think that moves the needle enough. Like, I don't think that
Trey Flowers would for me. Hand up. Trey Flowers would for me.
Slightly. Like, we're not talking about Trey Flowers in the same conversation as some of these edge rushers that have signed in free agency. He's not Von Miller. He's not Chandler Jones.
They didn't need Von Miller or Chandler Jones. The only place they needed a signing like that was at corner. And outside of bringing back J.C. Jackson or borderline signing Carlton Davis, like, I don't know if he's in that tier. He's right on the line, right? Outside of those two, there was no Chandler Jones. The Chandler Jones in free agency this year at that position was J.C. Jackson, was the guy who, like I said, I would have liked for them to bring back. They didn't need Chandler Jones. They didn't need Von Miller. I don't even know that Allen Robinson was necessarily a fit, as I said for the last couple of weeks. Now, if a guy like Chris Godwin or Mike Williams had hit the market, that would be a different story. I always thought wide receiver was going through the draft. They really just needed a corner, a veteran middle linebacker. Both those spots could have been bringing back their own guys. And I think that was it. That was really all I was looking for in free agency.
Right.
Was like an
really
NFL starting caliber player there.
It's the guards, right? It's Karras and it's Shaq Mason. It's the fact that
Right.
they couldn't get it done with Ted Karras and that they traded Shaq Mason for a 5th-round pick when they really didn't have to make that move. Those are the two things that I think bugged me the most about this offseason. If you put Shaq Mason and Ted Karras back on this team, then I feel a lot better about where they're at because they've moved on from guys like J.C. Jackson in the past, right? And they make it work. They figure it out. They draft and replace, and the engine keeps going. The Karras and Shaq Mason moves were unnecessary. They lost Ted Karras over not even guaranteed money. They lost him over a couple $1 million in just total value and maximum contract value. With Shaq Mason, what was that trade? And what was the necessity of that trade? And I think if you go and you put those guys back on the team, that we would all feel a lot better about where they stand this offseason. But again, I think the biggest thing that I have concerns about is that every single time, I cannot tell you, Alex, how many messages I have gotten since free agency opened on Monday with people telling me the Patriots inquired, but they weren't paying the money. And it's not just guys like Allen Robinson, right? It's guys at every single level of the free agent market. Like, they had an interest in, I'll just rattle off some wide receivers. They had interest in Allen Robinson, too much money. They had interest in Jakeem Grant, too much money. They had interest in Cedric Wilson, too much money. Like, all those guys are at different levels, right? And all of it was too much money. So at what point in time is it not too much money? Is it going to have to be somebody like Travis Benjamin, who they've shown some interest in, or Dede Westbrook, who they showed some interest in? And what good is it to bring those guys in at this point? Like, I would much rather, if you're going to go that direction, then drafting, it doesn't even need to be a 1st-round pick wide receiver. You could draft a guy in the 4th round that probably produces as much as Dede Westbrook's going to produce for this team next year. So my concern is the fact that they don't actually want to shell out the cash for anybody. And Jarvis Landry, nope, not interested, right? Like, this is what we're talking about. It's about real cash dollars. And that's, I think, what the biggest concern that I have with this team. They did make some moves. They did make some moves yesterday, lost some more people yesterday. I think the best way to go about this is to start with the people that they did bring in, and Ty Montgomery is the only one so far. I think we already talked about Terrence Mitchell, didn't we? So
no, because I think it was yesterday morning.
Okay, so we can go with that. We'll start with Montgomery just since it was the newer signing. I sent a DM to Nick Underhill, who used to be on the Patriots beat, now covers the Saints, does a great job down there in New Orleans. I asked him if he thought Ty Montgomery had anything left in the tank, and Nick's response was one word: N-O. No, nothing left in the tank. So, Alex, what did they see in Ty Montgomery, and why is he here?
He gives them, it's not that he can necessarily do one thing very well. It's that he's going to do a bunch of things at a, acceptable level. He gives them depth behind James White. He gives them depth behind Jacoby Myers. He can cover kicks. He's really good. That was something he did last year for the first time, and he was pretty good at it. So I think that's what it is, right? You're losing all this talent. They want guys who can do multiple things. So now you have your backup slot receiver, you have your backup pass catching running back. This probably does check off running back as a need in the draft, honestly. So that's one less thing you need to do there. And it checks off a coverage guy. And don't be fooled. Like, as much as people want to bitch and moan that they spend too much money on special teams, that unit's kind of thin right now, at least for their standards. Brandon Bolden's gone. Brandon King is still a free agent. They could bring him back, but they've lost guys there more than they've brought them in the last couple of years. So I think he's just a guy that can plug in a bunch of different spots, and maybe it limits some of the, it cross off some of those bottom tier. He crossed off some of those bottom tier needs. He can return kicks too. Gunner's a pending free agent. Or I guess now is a free agent technically. He's a fine player. I always really liked him in Green Bay. I honestly thought he was like 32, 33. It feels like he's been in the league for a while. He came in the league in 2015. He turned 29 last month. But yeah, fine signing. Like, if they had done a couple other things, I'd be like, hey, this is good. Like, a nice guy at the bottom of the roster is going to contribute in a couple different ways. Those guys can help steal you a game from time to time. It's just when I said to open the show, when that's the only move, it's a little bit tougher.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Ty Montgomery is here for. And you're right. I think Terrence Mitchell fits that box as well, that if this was last year and they were adding Terrence Mitchell into that cornerback group with JC Jackson at the top of it, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, remember what happened in Buffalo in the wild card round when Jalen Mills gets COVID, can't play in the game on Sunday, they get blown off the field. Well, now if you had a guy like Terrence Mitchell instead of Jawan Williams in there, or instead of some of the practice squad guys they called up, that move adds depth. It adds some comfortability. It adds some stability at that spot. I don't necessarily think that Terrence Mitchell is a guy that's going to start a lot of games for the Patriots next year, but he's a good fourth corner and a guy that could start a game if they absolutely needed him to and wouldn't be a total liability out there. And I think Ty Montgomery fits in a similar category where they lost Brandon Bolden to Patriots West. They needed a backup plan for a guy like James White coming out of the backfield. He can play a little bit of receiver as well if they lose somebody there to an injury. He can potentially return kicks. I don't know if he's got the juice to return kicks anymore, but
he hasn't done it in a couple of years, not regularly.
Yeah, it's certainly something that he could at least test out in training camp and see in practice if he's able to do it at a high level or any sort of high level. And those are the types of fill-in middle tier, low tier signings, middle class, if you will, that the Patriots have always had, that have really been productive players for New England. I think the issue is more about the top of the roster right now and where the Patriots are going with that. I mentioned all those wide receivers that the Patriots have cheaped out on. Apparently, according to Andrew Callahan, who originally reported that they were interested in La'el Collins, now that he's going to be a free agent, they're no longer interested in La'el Collins because it'd be too expensive. So,
then trade for him. If you know his price is going to go up and you want him, to trade for him.
Right. And apparently they couldn't figure out a day 3 pick for La'el Collins or a swap for La'el Collins on day 3. Clearly the Cowboys were just trying to get rid of him, right? They were going to cut him outright. So you couldn't have traded the 5th round pick you got for Shaq Mason to Dallas for La'el Collins. As it is, the 5th round is the round that they take punters and long snappers and special teams cover guys, right? I mean, that's the special teams round for Bill Belichick. That's a tough one to swallow too. The fact that they couldn't make a trade with Dallas for La'el Collins as well.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of speculate here, and then I'm going to be super Bobo Homer and kind of throw a theory out that's going to get me made fun of, but I'm going to throw it out anyway. First off, if they were to trade a 5th for La'el Collins, the 5th they only have 1 5th. They traded their original one last year for Trent Brown. So that would have been the Shaq Mason pick.
Right.
Dallas needs a guard, like badly. I wonder if they could have traded Shaq Mason for La'el Collins straight up and if they offered that.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what moving that 5th would have been. And I wonder if they didn't want to move anything more than that because they didn't value La'el Collins more than they valued Shaq Mason. If that makes sense? You know what I'm saying?
I actually think it's honestly a decent deal because I think what ultimately happened with Shaq Mason is, one, they obviously felt like his play was a little bit on the decline and his production was not going to match the contract years left on his contract. The second thing I think what happened with Shaq is, in their system in particular, they see Michael Onwenu as a right guard. They feel like his long-term home is best suited. As we know, Shaq has been one of the best run blockers in the NFL for half a decade now. He pulls a lot. They combo with him a lot. And they feel like that should be Michael Onwenu for this team moving forward at right guard. So I would have loved that move. You trade Shaq Mason, you get La'el Collins, you need a right tackle that's not Trent Brown or just going kind of year to year with that right tackle position over the last couple of years. You solidify it, you get a bona fide stud in La'el Collins, you put Onwenu on that side with him at right guard, his natural position in your scheme, and I could explain that, right? I could justify that. The fact that they're not even in La'el Collins' market anymore is really disappointing to me because, yeah, it's easier said than done, in my opinion, to just say, oh, well, they'll find a guard in the 5th round and plug him in. I would have thought that if Dante Scarnecchia was still here as the offensive line coach. I even would have thought that if Carmen Bracillo was still the offensive line coach, because he's the one that coached up Onwenu. Let's not forget, that wasn't Scar. Right? He's the one that coached up Onwenu. So I would have sat there and said, okay, yeah, they'll figure that out. If Matt Patricia's coaching the offensive line, are they going to be able to plug in a rookie 5th round pick at guard and start him in week 1?
Yeah. So hang on. So here's the other half of that take though. So and again, this is where I'm going kind of homer, and I don't, this is more of a concept than my personal belief, but they don't want to part with picks in this draft. They don't want to do it.
Yeah.
They gave up Shaq Mason just to get a pick. Is it possible? So they're not adding anybody, whatever. Is it possible that they just have a really good read on this draft? They really love this class and they think, hey, we can get a starting caliber guard in the 5th round. Hey, we're not going to give up a 4th round pick for La'el Collins because we know we can get a starting caliber wide receiver, linebacker, corner in the 4th round. A guy who's cost controlled, a guy who's under contract, a guy who's young. Like, maybe this is a little, maybe I'm being overly optimistic here, but if you want that view of it, how do I spin this to make it seem like the Patriots are on top of things? Anytime you can add a player, right? If and here's this kind of catch-22. If there's 2 equal players, you'd rather add a player in the draft than free agency because the player in the draft is younger, cheaper, and odds are under contract for more term. The catch-22 in that is it's impossible to know a player in the draft is of equal caliber to any player already in the league because the player in the draft has never played at the NFL level. That's the catch-22 in it, theoretically. But is it possible the Patriots, whoever it is, whatever it is, and we could do a week's worth of shows about just figuring out the answer to this question, and we will, by the way, starting next week.
Yeah.
Is it possible the Patriots just look at this draft and say, we can get a player close enough to La'el Collins that we're not giving up a 4th round pick. We can get a player close enough to who's one of the corners that signed, like any of the veteran corner. Who's the one who signed in Atlanta today? Who people liked for them?
Casey Hayward.
I'm blanking on the name. Right. We can get a guy, and Casey Hayward's like 30. We can get a guy who's going to give us what Casey Hayward would have given us in year 1, but he's 8 years younger, right? And we know we can get that guy. It's Tariq Woolen, it's whoever. We can get that guy in the 3rd round. We're not parting with that pick for anything, right? We don't need to bring J.C. Jackson back because we know Andrew Booth is going to be a number 1 corner in year 1, and we can take him at 21 and save $10, $15 million, whatever it would be. So, again, there's a lot of ifs there. I'm not necessarily saying that's what I believe, but if that's how they feel, then what they're doing makes sense. If that is how they feel, then there would be no reason for them to go and start splurging in free agency. Is this that draft? Can they actually identify the talent? Do the guys they want, will they be on the board in those spots? Again, if that's the game they're playing, it's a dangerous game to play. But if you want to know, like, oh, hey, how do you spin this to a positive? There you go.
Well, this relates back to what Kraft said last year, which is good teams, sustainable teams build through the draft. They don't build through free agency. They don't overpay veteran talent in free agency. They draft good players and they develop good players. And that's the way that good teams have sustained success in the NFL. And I think what we've seen this year after the spending spree last year is a return back to that side of thinking. So I agree with you 100% that I think the Patriots think they're going to knock this draft out of the park. And yesterday, I know a lot of people tweeted about it. You wrote about it, Alex, that the Patriots continued down at the Georgia Pro Day. Bill was there. Patricia was there. Groh was there. Some of their assistant coaches were there, right? Watching all these guys at Georgia. So they feel in every sense of it, from a spending standpoint, from what they've done so far in free agency, it definitely feels like they are way more all in on the draft than they are in free agency. Like, I feel like they're just saying to themselves, let's get some guys to fill in some blanks, like the Terrence Mitchell, like a Ty Montgomery, and let's get to April, because that's where we're going to really do our work. And that's where we're going to focus on. We're not going to sit here and comb through hours and hours of free agency tape, right? We're not going to watch all these guys in free agency because we're going to the draft. And that's the positive spin on it. And I think
so real quick, the one other thing I'd add to that take, and I've said this before, last year, director of player personnel, who's essentially the GM, the number 2 to Bill, right? The director of player personnel is Dave Ziegler. His entire career background was in pro personnel, free agency, contract renegotiation, contract extension, all that. That was his background.
Yeah.
That job he's now in Vegas. That job is now held by Matt Groh. Matt Groh's entire background is in scouting, the college game, all of that. So the guy in charge is a draft guy. He's not afraid. Now, that doesn't mean he can't do both. Obviously, with Ziegler in charge last year, they had a good draft. But
Right.
Groh was a big part of that. We saw
Right.
Groh was at the Georgia Pro Day, right? Right, he was there, right, at the start of free agency.
And from what I'm told,
they have a draft guy running the show. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, from what I'm told, the guy that's truly running free agency right now is Elliot Wolf. Obviously, Belichick is
Which makes
involved,
sense.
and he's part of the negotiation, probably the part of the negotiation, but the guy on the horn is Elliot Wolf, and he's the one that's making the calls to agents, and he's the one that's putting in offers, and Bill's kind of just giving him a thumbs up or a thumbs down behind the scene. And that, I think, is where we're headed with this, is, like you said, back to the draft being the focus, back to drafting and developing, identifying good players in the draft, and using that as the way that you're going to get your studs. You're not going to get your blue chippers in free agency. They just don't believe in that. They don't think that the way that these other teams are doing it, like the Rams, for instance, who just don't care about draft picks or the salary cap and are just doing whatever they want to do out there, they don't believe that that's sustainable. They think in a year or two, that roster is going to age, everybody's going to get very expensive, and that team is going to fall by the wayside. And they'll probably end up being correct. But the question is, when you have Mahomes and you have Allen and you have what the Chargers are doing with Justin Herbert, like the next team is always going to be coming, right? The next Rams is always going to be building. So can you outbuild those teams? But ultimately, I think what this comes down to with the spending and free agencies, the Patriots just don't think the value is there. They just don't think that that's the right way to go. They don't think that it's the right way to build your roster, is by paying for all these veteran players, overpaying for them most of the time. And I think last year in free agency during the spending spree, they looked at it and they said, well, quite frankly, there's some of the players that we signed that we probably overpaid for that we might not even want at their cap number anymore, right? Like, do they want Nelson Aguilar on this team? Do they want Johnny Smith and his cap number on this team?
When you look at what some of the receivers are getting this year, I don't know that Nelson Aguilar's cap number is a mistake at this point, but that's probably another conversation.
Yeah, so I get it. I think that is the model. And the one thing that I would push back on, or the one thing that I would sort of wish would happen here, is, like you said at the beginning, it's targeted signings, right? It's not the $200 million spending spree that we're all looking for, but it's the one or two veteran players that come in just to keep the arrow pointed in the right direction. And whether that was a guy like Allen Robinson they felt, or even if it's somebody on a lower level, like they might still be involved in Marquez Valdes-Scantling's market. I don't think that he's this great player, but maybe they feel that that's the move. Or maybe, like Greg Bedard threw out around the combine, it's a Robbie Anderson for Nelson Aguilar type of swap, right? And they feel like that's a little bit of an improvement. Nobody was expecting them to add through free agency like they did last year. But making some little moves, and when I say little, I mean just in volume, but making a few moves to make the team better should have been a priority. And maybe we'll still get that. Maybe we'll still get that. All right, let's talk about something. Go ahead.
Well, I would just say real quick to that, too, with the Nelson Aguilar for Robbie Anderson thing, the Patriots probably net a pick in that, I would think. Net a pick in that deal. So here you go again. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them start acquiring draft capital. I think they're going to trade down. I think they're going to trade down on 21.
That's sort of the feeling that you get, is for obvious reasons, and they've already, signed one guy in Terrence Mitchell I want to talk about more in a second here. The trade market, guys that were released, veterans that were released that don't count towards the comp formula, that seems to be more of where they've done most of their homework in this offseason in terms of the veteran market, right? Like, I don't think they did a whole lot of work on this free agency class in terms of just guys that they like, studying guys, making sure they would fit, looking into their backgrounds, things like that. I think where they've done most of their homework in terms of the veteran market are potential trade acquisitions and releases off of teams that don't count towards the comp pick formula. So we mentioned Trey Flowers, Logan Ryan, Fletcher Cox, I think is a little bit of a dream scenario, but maybe that could come to fruition. Things like that. La'el Collins still, there are reports out there that says they're out now on La'el Collins, but maybe they jump back in if that market doesn't go crazy. I want to go back, though, to some of the other moves that they made here over the last couple of days. And Terrence Mitchell, we mentioned him briefly there. It's interesting that they went with Mitchell instead of some of the other guys at that price point. And why I say that is because he did play some man in Cleveland in 18, some man in Kansas City all the way back at the beginning of his career. But last year in Houston, and really over the last couple of seasons where he's been, they've been a zone-based system where he's been at. And we talked about this a little bit with Mac Wilson too. And I don't want to read too much into these low-level signings or trades and act like this is a tea leaf that says that they're changing and overhauling their defensive system. But another guy in Terrence Mitchell that I would say is more comfortable as a zone corner than a straight press man corner like they typically do. And then the other signing there that I wanted to talk about was Jakob Johnson going out to Vegas and what that could potentially mean. The Patriots not acquiring a fullback as of yet, but with Mitchell, how much are you reading into this, and how do you feel if they're going to play zone? Like, how do you feel about that in general?
Well, so I got to find this tweet again. Phil Perry just actually tweeted something about this that I thought was interesting. They're going to need more pieces. It's just more players they need if they're going to play zone. That's ultimately how I feel about it. They need different pass rushers. They need different linebackers, which they're starting to go that way, but they have lighter linebackers. I don't know if they have zone linebackers. Okay, enough stalling. Here's a tweet from Phil 14 minutes ago. Phil A. Perry on Twitter. Been told it's too strong to say the Patriots are definitely shifting at linebacker. Game plan team. Open to smaller options. And then, all right. And then he plugs his podcast. I think that's kind of what it is. I think they want to mix. I still think there's, whether it's Hightower or whoever, and the longer Hightower goes without signing, by the way, the greater the chance I think it is he's back in New England. I really thought he was going to end up in Pittsburgh. And then they go out and they sign Bobby Wagner. I still think they're going to bring in a 260, 270 pound linebacker. I think they want to mix it and match it.
Okay.
I still think they're going to play. They might play some zone. They might truly become a game plan defense. They might not be a man or zone defense. It might just be whatever the day calls for. I wouldn't put that past Bill. Now, that's incredibly difficult to do. You need a lot of personnel. And we spent the first half hour of the show talking about how, time's kind of running out on them just purely in terms of bodies, getting everybody they need.
Right.
So it feels a little tough, but that's the direction I think they're going. I think they want to be able to play both.
Yeah, I would agree that they've always sort of been like that to a degree, but their man system is really, really simple, right? It's one-on-one. Like it's not really that complex.
It's simple schematically. It's very difficult to play technically.
Right. So that's the catch side, right? Is that it's very simple systematically, schematically, but when it comes to actually getting those types of corners, there's only certain corners that can hang in that type of system. Terrence Mitchell, to me, is not one of them. Like, if you're putting Terrence Mitchell in a bunch of man coverage, and I know that people said this a little bit, like Jalen Mills, too, that he's not a man corner, and he held up okay in man last year. But Terrence Mitchell is a guy that was, I think he ran like a 4.7 in the 40 back at the combine when he was coming out of college. He's somebody that you don't want playing a ton of man-to-man. And I just... Right. That's something that I would be a little bit wary of. And I don't know. It just is interesting that Mac Wilson's smaller. He's got a little bit more athleticism or coverage feel to him. Terrence Mitchell's more of a zone corner as well. And maybe a guy in the draft like Andrew Booth Jr., who doesn't have a ton of experience in press man, has some really, really good tape in press, but he doesn't have the reps that some of the other guys do in straight press. Maybe he's somebody that is more in the conversation, or like the Washington DBs. Those are guys that play a lot of zone, right? Out there in Washington. Maybe those guys start to be more a part of this conversation as well. The other schematic.
And by the way, real quick, I meant Miles Jack in Pittsburgh, not Bobby Wagner. Wrong linebacker that got released.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah. Another schematic shift that I wanted to talk about was Jakob Johnson going out with Josh McDaniels in Las Vegas with the Raiders. We have seen the Patriots over the last couple of years try to get more athletic at the fullback position. I would say guys like Dan Vitale and Dalton Keene, and maybe Ben Mason was a little bit more of an athletic guy than somebody like Jakob Johnson. But until the Patriots sign a fullback, I am interested to see, is that gone by the wayside? And is that sort of more a Josh McDaniels thing to be that power eye two back team? Or are they going to just sign a fullback or draft a fullback or probably hopefully not draft one, maybe UDFA fullback they like or something like that and go that direction? But would you like them to go away from the fullback in general though?
I don't know. I think I think two of their best offensive players are Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. I know you're going to roll your eyes at this, but you got to capitalize on those guys and their downhill running abilities.
At this point, they're two of their best offensive players, so I can't really roll my eyes at it.
I mean, well, no, I meant the idea that you got to kind of capitalize on their skill sets. But you know, you're better off with those guys if you have fullback. Doesn't mean he needs to play a significant amount. I think when Jakob Johnson played last year, I think it's around 30% usage rate, which is probably about right. That's about where he should be. Overall, I think they're about 35% with a fullback because they used a lineman on a handful of occasions. The utility fullback thing is interesting to me. And you talk about a fullback in the draft, it's really just Connor Hayward. Like, there's not that old school, blocking fullback. That
they would love Connor Hayward. I mean, not just because he's
really
personal, but because of the family lineage in the NFL too, and some of the other connections to the Patriots.
He's the mental makeup. I mean, the guy's first one, last out kind of guy. All of that. That might be the plan. That honestly might be the plan. I think they should have a fullback. There's another. I got to remember his name, Elijah Penny, who also, by the way, is another sibling. It's Rashad Penny's, I believe, younger brother. I might be wrong on that, but younger brother. He was with Joe Judge in New York the last couple of years, and he is a more utility fullback. He caught 20-something passes last year. He didn't have a overly heavy workload, but he can contribute in the passing game. Again, the familiarities there with Judge. He's a guy I would look at in free agency. I know people were tweeting at me yesterday, Patrick Ricard. They're not spending money at any of these positions.
Right.
You think they're going to spend a fullback? Like, the two names I keep throwing out, if it's in free agency, it's Elijah Penny. If it's in the draft, it's Connor Hayward. Both those guys are utility fullbacks. There just aren't a ton of those blocking fullbacks available anymore. They might really have to dig to find one. When I say there isn't one in the draft, the board I use goes like 550 players deep. And trust me, I'm not necessarily familiar with every player on the board, but I sort it by position a lot. Connor Hayward's the only fullback. So it goes 566 players deep. This board. Shout out Isaiah Land, linebacker, Florida A&M. What was I saying? Yeah, so if they want to find a true blocking fullback and they're not doing it in free agency, they're going to have to go to Canada. They're going to maybe the International Pathway Program again.
Right.
I mean, this is beyond the USFL at this point. Japan plays college football. I know Norway does. I'm missing an obvious one, Arena League. But yeah, I mean, that might be what you're talking about. There's guys out there. There's just, we get in the weeds, right? With this stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking beyond our knowledge in that.
Yeah.
Which is why I think they're going utility. I think they would have kept Jakob Johnson if they wanted that role. I think they're going to go with the utility fullback. Ben Mason, real quick, not on the roster anymore. He signed a futures deal with the Ravens. And that's the other thing.
Yeah.
Some of these guys are going to get cut. They may just be like, we'll throw whoever. We'll throw William Sherman at fullback throughout camp. And then somebody will break free and we'll sign him off a practice squad or claim him on waivers or whatever before the season starts. That could very much be the plan too.
Yeah, as much as it drives me crazy just from a big picture standpoint and the fact that your maximum point production is so much lower as a team when you run a team out of 21 regular the way the Patriots have in the past couple of years, but their production and their efficiency out of 21 personnel has been the best out of any personnel grouping that they've been in pretty much going on since like the 2018 season, right? Like it's been 3 or 4 years now where 21 has been their most productive grouping. Why? Because they're averaging over 4 yards per carry on the ground when they're in 21. And number two, their play action passing game is fantastic out of 21 personnel. They lead the fullback through the hole. They get everybody to jump up. They hit the tight ends and the slot receivers crossing over the middle. It's a difficult play to stop. They've been running it like the same way for 10 years. Now, you mentioned the utility fullback. I also would love to throw Jonnu Smith's name into that ring. Like, from everything that I've seen from him on tape when it comes to blocking last year, when he was handing the dirt and just trying to engage somebody right in front of him with zero momentum, he was getting himself ragdolled sometimes. Like, he was not a very good inline blocker last year for the Patriots. Maybe they can get more out of him as a blocker if he gets a head start. If he's able to move or generate some momentum first, whether it's coming out of the backfield from a fullback alignment or even more like an H-back alignment where he's coming across the formation, just something that you're able to just get rolling a little bit before you get into the block. I wonder if that would be a better usage of his skill set, and then also be able to run routes out of the backfield and get him some mismatches and then get him into some space coming out. The best game Jonnu Smith had was actually a half. It was that first half against the Jets, the first time they played New York. Or second time, excuse me, the one game at Gillette. He had like 50 yards in the half, right? He had a catch out of the backfield and fullback. They ran a corner route with him from a fullback spot. They never ran the play again, or at least they never hit it again, right? And that's what I wonder is maybe they could see using him. I've always looked at Jonnu and thought a little bit Kyle Juszczyk-like, right? Like, he's got that kind of skill set to him where he's not really the pure route runner. He's not really a pure inline guy, but he can kind of do a little bit of everything. That would probably, in my mind, get a little bit more out of him. So I would throw Jonnu Smith's name in that hybrid fullback or utility fullback position as well. But it does feel like they want to get a little bit more punch out of that spot. And they don't want that guy to be a complete negative or, kind of a zero when they do throw the football and do go to the air out of 21 personnel.
By the way, I did find the list of draft fullbacks. Yeah, most of them are out of the top
Of course you did.
500. The number one fullback, actually, hang on here, John Chenal from Wisconsin. I'm guessing that's his brother. That's got to be Leo Chenal's brother, right?
Hey, you draft Leo Chenal the way they used Landon Roberts a few years ago. That guy could definitely be a fullback, right? I mean, that's not his best role, obviously. But
Xander Horvath from Purdue. Purdue produced Mike Allstott. I could be into that. Ben Miles. Some of these guys are all right. So there's 5 guys here, but yeah, they're all safe. So they're there. We don't need to go over Japan. They're there, but yeah.
All right. So anything to add about Brandon Bolden? I know we talked about him a little bit with Ty Montgomery. Do you feel like this is a big impact loss? Obviously, it's not a big impact loss, but Brandon Bolden he deserves a minute on the show, I feel like, right? I mean, a consummate Patriot, 2 stints with New England, both were good. Really filled in very well for James White last year. Wasn't James White, but he did a very, very good job in his stay. Core special teams player. He's one of those guys who's talking to us about how he had so many text chains going back his entire time with the Patriots with former Pats running backs, Dion Lewis, LeGarrette Blount, Stephen Ridley were some names he mentioned. I think a lot of people, Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, can probably attest to this as well. Brandon Bolden was a mentor, was somebody that they all looked up to and learned a lot from, even though he wasn't necessarily a Pro Bowl running back in his own right. He really helped a lot of those guys that were very good.
Yeah, just a genuinely good person. Like,
yeah,
loves football, loves his teammates, all of that. He did a great job filling in for James White last year. I know he got a lot of hate for his performance early in the year, but that's really not his role. They really asked him to play well outside his comfort zone, and he figured it out admirably by November. I think he did as much as he could have asked for. And then to find out, he's working his way back from cancer. He was still playing football, all of that.
Yeah.
That's the kind of guy you always want, one guy like that on your team, at least one guy like that on your team. And maybe he's not going to play a ton. Maybe he's not going to sell the most jerseys. Maybe he's not going to get the headlines every week, but he's a guy that you rally around. Everybody in the locker room likes. He makes going to work a little bit easier. He gives you something to play for. So consummate professional, absolutely, in every sense of the word. And that's, when you're a first-year coach like Josh McDaniels, you want a guy like that, especially a guy you're familiar with. And he's going to kind of help bridge that gap between the guys who already were in Vegas and some of the other first-year players who maybe aren't familiar with McDaniels as much. And by the way, some of this can be said about Jakob Johnson too, I think. It's just a really good deal all around for the Raiders, for Brandon Bolden himself. Happy to see him get his deal. And as for the Patriots, Montgomery probably is going to give them more or less football-wise what they'd miss. If they hadn't brought back James White, it would be a much bigger discussion, but James White's back. I'm still pretty much where I was 2 weeks ago. Can we just get a kid who maybe can fill that role? We know J.J. Taylor's not the guy. Can we start looking for James White's replacement now? But short-term, not a monumental need, not a monumental football loss.
Yeah, and I think unless they are going out there and they're adding a bunch of more picks into this draft, the third down receiving back is probably something that's going to have to wait. Maybe they could get
hang on.
Yeah,
and maybe they can get somebody UDFA. But let's play a quick game here real quick. They're scheduled to have 7 picks right now.
Yes.
Over under 7.5 picks. How many do they make in the draft this year when it's all said and done?
Well, they only have 28 players under contract in 2023. So 2022's roster, they probably don't have a bunch of starting spots for all those picks, right? Even if you hit on every single one of them. But looking ahead to 2023, they have half their roster, right? I mean, they have a big hole to fill there. So I actually think that they could draft over that quite easily and be able to just make sure that this team not only has some plug and play guys for 2022 is obviously the main goal, but looking ahead to 2023, there's going to be a lot of turnover again. And at some point, we're going to start talking about some of these other, Devin McCourty, for example, and Matthew Slater said this to us this morning. There was a conversation there between those two guys. Like, are we going to come back? Are we going to do this again? And if we are, we're doing it together. At some point, they're going to look at each other and say, we're done. Right. So you start looking ahead at some of these needs in 2023 too, which I know the Patriots are going to do in the draft. They're not just looking at it as a 1-year prism. They're looking at it as a multi-year prism. I would say way over 7 if they could. I don't know if they can pull off enough trades to make that happen, but that's the way I would look at it.
I think they can get to 9 or 10. I'm going to take the over there too. Like the way I look at it. You duplicate the Kyle Duggar trade, which was 25 for 37 and 60 something.
Yeah.
But you're picking a little higher. So instead of a first for a second and a third, you go first for a second, a third, and a sixth.
Right.
So boom, right there. Total's gone from 7 to 9.
Yeah.
Do you move down, if you're at 85 and most of the top 100 guys you like are gone, does 85 become like 110 and 180? Right? So yeah, they're going to have their chances. And they didn't make any deals last year. They made the one to move up to get Baltimore. That was it. I'm going to take the over too. I think the number ends up being closer to 9 or 10 than 7.
Yeah. And then as Goose mentioned in the chat, 2023, you get all those comp picks from JC Jackson, probably Ted Karras probably will register on the comp pick formula as well. So you're going to get a couple more comp picks. You're going to have another decent sized draft class again in 2023. That's the goal. They want to build through the draft. They want to be sustainable. I just wish for me, I wish that they would pay the guys, right? Like JC Jackson earned it and they didn't want to pay him. So that I think is the more frustrating part about it. They just don't want to shell out the cash this year. They just don't want to pay. I know we have some theories as to why last year, who knows? I don't know. Stadium rebuild. I don't think that should be a factor, but it's all got to come out of Robert Kraft's wallet somehow, right? So who the heck knows? A couple of other rumors here before we wrap things up. Trent Brown going out to Seattle to meet with the Seahawks. Maybe it's an injury thing. I'm not exactly sure why Trent Brown has to take, visits at this point, right? And not just sign a contract like any other free agent. But he's going out to visit Seattle. I would think he said on the radio the other day, or maybe it was to Josina Anderson, that the Patriots are still in the mix and he'll probably go back to New England and say, this is what Seattle's offering, and they'll see if they want to match it. I think it's obvious that Trent Brown coming back would be a good thing for this team. How do you feel about it?
Hang on. I'm trying to catch up on something here. Trying to figure out if this is real. I do think that they should bring Trent Brown back. So yes and no. I'm torn. If you bring Trent Brown back, it's probably on a 1-year deal, right?
Right.
And then now you're replacing both tackles next year. Like, Okay. In theory, I'm trying to figure out how I should phrase this. I want to tackle. I want a starting caliber tackle on a multi-year deal. Easier said than done. If that's Trent Brown, awesome. If Trent Brown's only going to come back on a 1-year deal, I don't know who's left. I think Morgan Moses signed, right? That was the guy I really liked for them.
Yes.
There were a couple starting caliber guys. I would go try to find somebody on a multi-year deal just so you don't have to replace both tackles in the same offseason, because that's doing a lot. That is doing a ton. So that's where I'm at with Trent Brown. Like, ideally, Trent Brown's what, like 28? Give me Trent Brown on a 3-year deal. Give me Trent Brown on a 3-year deal. I'm over the moon. Trent Brown on a 1-year deal, I'd take him back. Like, he's a good player. I'd take him back. But, 2 tackles in one offseason. We're trying to do 2 corners in one offseason right now. I mean, it's comparable to this. And look at how, you're pulling teeth already with this. Do you want to do this again next year? When, like you said, like half the roster is set to become free agents. So that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I would take Trent Brown back as well, but I'm definitely a little bit worried about how much years and how much guaranteed money you're going to commit to a guy like Trent Brown. Injuries have been an issue for him the last couple of years. And he had an injury last year with the Patriots. I don't think he's played a full season since 2018. Now that I think about it, because he had the 2 injury seasons with the Raiders. I know that. I remember that. And then he had the injury season last year with the Patriots. So I don't think that they've had him in full tilt since 2018. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to consider. Obviously, I think if you're giving him a multi-year deal, it's most likely, because of cap reasons, right? You want to spread the cap hit out between this year and next year. But the second one, I would just be really wary of guaranteeing any sort of money into that second season, right?
And so that's why I'm hesitant, because I agree. I don't know that it makes sense to give him a multi-year deal, but like, do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
I do. Replacing both tackles is such, and I want Trent Brown back. He's a good player. He's a great fit for their scheme. He loves being here. But I don't want to have to replace both. I don't think he's that good where I want to go through essentially what we're doing with corners right now with tackles next offseason.
Fair enough.
Eli Apple's going back to Cincinnati, by the way.
Yeah, I don't think they really were.
I thought they were going to be in on him.
In Eli Apple.
So
that's a weirdo diva. I don't know if he fits them. You got something else, or
I mean, I don't know if you saw it when you were just looking.
Are we talking about a certain quarterback?
Yeah. Did you see that?
I saw the report. It looks like it's from like a radio station out of Atlanta or something like that.
Yeah, the Sports Talk ATL. So I texted a source about this person. I didn't text a source about the story. I don't have a source with the story, but I texted a source about this person who said, Jake, who's reporting this, has been first on this whole thing.
Okay.
So,
well, Benjamin Albright just now said that he couldn't get confirmation on that report. So I don't know.
At this point, we're driving people crazy. There is somebody out there. We're not saying this move has happened.
Yes.
There is somebody out there, quote, at Sports Talk ATL Jake on Twitter. He is the chief operations officer, producer of Sports Talk ATL, which is they're kind of like the CLNS of Atlanta.
Okay. So this is smaller than like Jimmy Stewart at 98.5 is phone.
No, I think it's comparable. Okay.
All right. Love you, Jay Stu.
He tweeted, Jay Stu's phone knows all. Jay Stu's phone is no joke. Sports Talk ATL, Jake. Deshaun Watson is expected to waive his no-trade clause and join the Atlanta Falcons, per source. Trade should be announced within the next few hours. He then followed that up with a screenshot that just says, Deshaun's coming home. Deshaun Watson is from the state of Georgia. I think he's from right outside of Atlanta, right?
Yeah, he's from Atlanta. Yes.
So,
Deshaun Watson with the Falcons, I'd love that for the pay. I mean, he's going. I just saw Doug, probably no matter what, right?
Right. I just saw Doug Hyde tweeted, the Falcons are signing free agent running back Damian Williams. So never mind.
DW, but wrong DW.
You're right. It was between, I think everybody knows at this point, it's between Atlanta and New Orleans. Those seem to be the spots. What I would say, my read on it is, because he's not a free agent. Let's remind ourselves of this, right?
Right.
If let's say he can pick his landing spot essentially by refusing to waive his no trade clause. But if he goes to Houston, and I don't know that he would do Houston any favors right now. I don't know that he'd do Cal McNair any favors right now. But if he says, I'm good with either New Orleans or Atlanta, Well, if I'm Houston, then Atlanta can offer the better package. They're picking 8th overall.
Right.
So that's why I've been leaning Atlanta this whole time.
Yeah.
We'll see if this is real. But
so the
like
thing
you said,
about
it helps the
Atlanta-
Patriots.
So the thing, yeah, it helps. Nick Casario is doing everybody in the AFC a service by making sure he's out of the AFC, right? But I think the thing that I have concerns with if I'm Deshaun, and I guess it's different now. Like if the Saints had Sean Payton, then I think this would be a done deal to New Orleans. Like I don't think he's going anywhere else.
Do you think Sean Payton would pull a Tom Brady if he has a chance to coach Deshaun Watson?
He could. And Sean Payton is considered by most to be a top 5-6 play caller and offensive mind in all of football, right? So if he was still the coach of the Saints, I think this is a no-brainer for Deshaun Watson to go there. Is Terry Footnote and the head coach down there in Atlanta, who Arthur Smith, like, are we sure those guys know what they're doing? Like, I think Arthur Smith's a good coach. I'm not saying that he's an idiot or anything like that, but are we sure that he's going to get that team competitive for a Super Bowl, right? Like I just, that's the thing that I push back with there. New Orleans has a little bit better of a track record. They don't have Sean Payton, which obviously hurts, but Mickey Loomis and the way that they've run things in New Orleans, they have a little bit of a better track record in terms of competing in the playoffs and getting closer, winning Super Bowls with Drew Brees.
So you're saying if you were Deshaun Watson, you would choose the Saints?
I would choose the Saints. I think
I probably would too. Again, if I'm Houston, I'd rather trade with Atlanta. If I'm Deshaun Watson, I'd choose Saints. Here we go. So I don't know if she saw this report or if she heard something else. Mina Kimes a minute ago. Has anyone done a good Matt Ryan Seahawks Photoshop asking for a friend?
Oh, I'm sure she just saw the report.
Fox NFL. The Falcons are signing running back Damian Harris to a 1-year deal, and they used a picture of Damian Harris with the Patriots.
Yikes.
That would be a typo. A great one, but a typo.
And with the picture, too. I mean, that's
with the picture.
With the picture. All right. Let's wrap this up. If there's one free agent, Alex, that's out there right now, still, who do you want the Patriots to sign? Who's the one guy that's still out on the market that you would really get excited about if the Patriots sign? Not Ty Montgomery, not Terrence Mitchell, but somebody who would really make you excited.
I got to think about who's out on the. I got to remember who's on the market. Well, as I learned from my misspeak earlier, Bobby Wagner is still on the market. Somebody, thanks to everybody who kind of filled in on that. I'd like Bobby Wagner. Like I really talked myself into the idea of Alan Lazard because I thought, Green Bay wasn't going to tender him. I'm not giving up a 2nd-round pick to get him. I'd still flirt with the idea, especially now that you have Ty Montgomery. I would still flirt with the idea of like Alan Lazard for Jakobi Meyers. And I'm not saying I'd do that, but I might look at it. You got to help me out. I really can't remember who's on the market at this point. We're like 4 days into this thing. I haven't slept. I'm trying to cover baseball free agency too for the Sports Hub, 98.5thesportshub.com. So if any free, actually, you didn't say a league. You just said if I could choose any free agent, who would it be? It's Nick Castellanos to the Red Sox. If I could choose any free agent right now, it's Nick Castellanos. They need a right-handed bat in the outfield. The dude hits for incredible power. He's a great guy. He's hilarious. Bring me Nick Castellanos. That's where I'm at right now.
All right. I'll bring it back to football for you. Okay. I think the one free agent, and they should have traded for the guy, is La'el Collins.
Yeah, you're probably right. I forgot about it.
They need to bring in La'el Collins. And I think the money's going to get silly now, and they're not going to do it just like they did with Allen Robinson. We've been talking about it for the last hour. But I would feel 10 times better about their offensive line next year if La'el Collins is in that mix. Because La'el Collins at right tackle, Onwenu at right guard, Andrews at center. I'll take Wynn at left tackle, and we can figure out left guard on the way. Makes me feel a lot more comfortable. And you know me, I wanted the wide receiver. I've wanted the wide receiver this whole time. I would love a wide receiver at the top of the draft, but I am still at my roots an offensive line guy. And I will say that at this point, offensive line is a bigger need than wide receiver is for this team. And they can add whatever wide receiver. They can add Chris Olave, Jameson Williams, whoever your favorite wide receiver is in the draft. If they can't protect Mac Jones, he's not going to be able to get him the football. So La'el Collins is a signing I would make. I would then go out and look for outside receiver help, potentially maybe add another guy there. But I'm really in on this offensive line thing. They got to figure out the line. And I wouldn't be so hell-bent if they want to take a guard, not in the first round, but if they want to take a guard at some point in the middle rounds and they think that guy can start for them as a rookie, then I believe them, right? They've done a good job of identifying, especially interior offensive linemen that can make an impact right away. So give me La'el Collins. You have one spot to fill at that point on the offensive line. Things feel a whole lot better on offense than what it did before they signed a guy like Collins. But if Andrew Callahan, which I assume he is correct, they are going to be out on La'el Collins. And Alex and I are going to mostly turn the page next week to the draft. We will obviously still continue to update you and discuss Patriots news as it pertains to free agency and trades and things like that. If there's a big move coming, we'll talk about it here. We hope there is, just for our sake. It's more entertaining than talking to you guys about Ty Montgomery.
Honestly, even if there's not, unless we do a show tomorrow and there's big news, we're doing mock drafts next week. I'm excited either way. I'm ready to dig in. Yeah. PFF, they got the picks right. They put kickers and punters in there. I'm ready to roll. Those were the best shows last year. I'm ready to roll. And we need ideas from you guys too, by the way. Like, I would think the first mock we do is just going to be straight up, right? Yes. But then, like, what happens if you trade up? What happens if you trade down? But, like, you know, we want to do different situations. We don't just want to do the same mock over and over. So you guys need to give us some ideas.
Yeah, I'm with that. It's going to be a lot of fun mock drafts next week. Look, a part of me wants to say, like, we should already be doing mock drafts because the Patriots are clearly on to the draft. Like, they clearly don't care about free agency this year. They're clearly already paying attention to the draft. So we'll be paying attention to the draft next week as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. Live mock draft simulators right here on Patriots Beat. We'll talk about all the permutations and all the possibilities and all the players the Patriots could draft. And we're really looking forward to it. We had a lot of fun with those last year. So we'll do them again every week in the lead up to the draft. And this is really, free agency is fun. We like it here. But the draft is really where we have our most fun. So we're going to get started on those next week, and it'll be a whole lot of fun for us, a whole lot of fun for you guys, hopefully, as well. But thanks so much for watching all of our free agency pods. Again, tomorrow, if they pop up with a big move or even a couple little ones or something like that we have stuff to talk about, we'll hop back on the pod tomorrow afternoon and discuss it. But for now, we'll most likely be signing off until next week when we start to turn the page towards the draft. So thanks, everybody, for watching us this week. We had great numbers, great turnout. We really appreciate all of you guys for following along during free agency. I wish that it was a little bit more exciting and there was some more fireworks that we could discuss, but hopefully those things are still to come. And until next week, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you then.